Hey folks, what's the biggest thing that keeps you from hitting buy on a new lens? For many of us it's the fear of ending up with a piece of glass that feels great on the spec sheet but ends up being a compromise when you actually go out shooting, whether that's missed focus, shaky handheld shots, or just not getting the kind of low light reach we need for portraits and events. In this video I'm going to walk through the Tamron 70180mm/2.8 DIIVC VXD G2 for Sony mount and try to strip away the hype so you can decide if it really fits your workflow. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, why does this focal range matter? The 70,180mm sweet spot sits right between classic portrait lenses, like an 85mm, and the longer reach you'd need for candid event work or wildlife that's not too far away. That means you can stay relatively close to a subject without intruding, and you still have enough compression to make faces look flattering. The f/2.8 aperture across the whole zoom is what makes the lens appealing for both low-light shooters and anyone who wants that shallow depth-of-field look without constantly swapping glass. Now, I spent a weekend doing exactly what a lot of photographers do, hitting a local wedding reception, a dim indoor concert, and a quick street photography run-through while alternating with my older Sony 70200mm f/2.8 G Master. The biggest question I asked myself was, does Tamron's VC, vibration compensation, hold up when I'm holding the camera handheld for a few seconds? At 70mm the lens claims a stabilization performance of 0.3 m, roughly 12 inches. In practice, that translated to being able to shoot at about 1/30s without visible blur when the venue lights were dim, something I would normally need at 1 out of 60s with my older lens. At 180mm, the claim is 0.85 m, about 33 inches, and I found that I could comfortably shoot handheld at 1/80s in the same lighting. Those numbers aren't magical, but they give you a real buffer when you're not on a tripod, which is a common scenario for event shooters and portraitists who need to move quickly. Autofocus is another place where the VXD motor matters. Tamron says this is a high-speed, high-precision unit with better subject tracking. In a live wedding scenario where people are moving, the focus locked onto faces within half a second on average. Compared with my Sony 70200 f/2.8, the Tamron was a hair slower in the very first half second after a subject entered the frame, but once it settled, it held focus just as tightly. The biggest win for me was the focussal during zoom feature. I could start recording a video, zoom from 70 to 180mm, and the camera kept the focus point on a performer's face without hunting. That's a practical advantage if you do video work and need a smooth zoom without pulling the focus manually. Low-light behavior beyond stabilization came down to how the lens handles contrast and flare. The fluorine coating on the front element does help keep smudges away, but the lens still shows a slight yellow cast when shooting directly into strong streetlights at night, something you see with many lenses at f/2.8. However, the built-in optical design seems to hold up to about 3 stops of light loss versus the Sony G Master, which is not a deal-breaker if you're comfortable pushing your ISO a bit higher. I did notice that the bokeh starts to become a bit hard-edged at 180mm when the aperture is wide open, but once you stop down to f/4 the background smooths out nicely, which is a useful tip if you want that creamy portrait look without sacrificing too many stops of light. One of the things that often trips up beginners or hobbyists is the ergonomics of the zoom ring and focus ring. The Tamron's zoom ring feels solid, with a subtle click that gives you a sense of where you are in the range. The focus ring is lighter than many professional lenses, which makes it easier to do quick manual adjustments when you need to fine-tune focus during video. The zoom lock switch is a small but thoughtful addition. You can lock the lens at a specific focal length and avoid accidental zoom creep when you're moving around a crowded venue. That sort of detail can save you a few awkward moments the first few times you use it. Battery confidence is a point I asked myself a lot because I know many Sony shooters complain about the camera's power drain when using V-stabilization. Using the lens on an A7 IV, I measured roughly a 10-15 minute reduction in battery life per hour compared to using a prime lens. That's not insignificant, but the trade-off for the flexibility of a zoom and built-in VC made it acceptable for my workflow, especially when I have spare batteries on hand. So, who should seriously consider this lens? If you're a hobbyist who already owns a Sony full-frame mirrorless body and you've been relying on a kit 2470mm or a prime 85mm for portraits, the 70180mm f/2.8 offers a versatile middle-tier range without breaking the bank.